Without any further ado, let's have Mark Baird.
I'd like for another group of veterans to stand, and that's the ladies and wives of Jefferson. Please stand. Stand up, ladies, stand up. None of this happens without you. Stand up. None of it. My wife is... My wife is home working right now, so I can be here. She's going to be feeding animals and cows and dragging hay off the trailer and filling waters and shoveling manure and doing all that stuff, and just so I can be here and talk to you. And I would like to read you a short paragraph from one of the other ladies of veterans of this country. This is a letter from Abigail Adams to John Adams. The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but the God of Israel is he that giveth strength and power unto his people. Trust in him at all times, ye people. Pour out your hearts before him. God is a refuge for us. Charleston is now laid in ashes. The battle began upon our entrenchments on Bunker's Hill Saturday morning about 3 o'clock, and has not ceased yet, and it is now 3 o'clock Sabbath afternoon. It is expected they will come out over the neck tonight, and a dreadful battle must ensue. Almighty God, cover the heads of our countrymen, and be a shield to our dear friends. How many have fallen, we know not. The constant roar of cannon is so distressing that we can't eat, drink, or sleep. May we be supported and sustained in the dreadful conflict. I shall tarry here until it is thought unsafe by my friends, and then I have secured myself a retreat at your brother's, who has kindly offered me a place in his house. I cannot compose myself to write any further. I will add more as I hear more. That's from one of the women who founded this nation. And the men involved could not have done it without her, nor can we without you. But I think what brings me here tonight is an important topic. We have a lot of things coming soon to us, and there are a lot of important dates that are approaching. And we need to have a talk about how important this is to us, whether it's important to us. And we need to talk about why we're doing it. Why are we doing this? What do we hope to prove to the state of California? What really do we hope to gain? And I'd like to say that the people who first came to this country, the very first colony in Northern Virginia was the Mayflower Colony, and they stood in a group together and they signed a compact together. There was no government here. There was no one telling them what to do. They had a king that they'd left behind. Why did they leave that king behind? Why did they flee to the New World? Is it the same reason that people from South America are fleeing to the United States? Because Mexico and Honduras are the greatest places to live on earth, and so they just thought they'd leave because they could? No. It's because they're subjugated and tortured and killed and murdered and treated unjustly in their homeland, and they're hoping to come here for a better life. The ones that do so legally are entitled to every benefit citizenship affords them, every single one. The ones that don't come here legally are criminals, and we have to do what we have to do. But that isn't the point. The point is people created government, and they created government for a specific reason. Why were the people of the Mayflower Colony running from England? Because the King of England placed himself above God. That's why. Because he failed to respect the laws of God, the laws of nature, what John Locke and William Blackstone called nature's law, derived from nature's God. And what Cicero said 2,000 years ago, some laws aren't written anywhere except in the hearts of men. We derive them not through training, but through nature itself. In other words, we get those laws from God. Those laws are paramount. Those laws are supreme to any civil law. The law we receive from our Maker is the law. Government can do nothing that God doesn't tell them is okay. Government can do nothing that isn't in the Constitution. The Constitution is not a permission slip for government to do whatever it wants. The Constitution is a binder so that government cannot do anything that is not specifically within it. In fact, Constitution only binds government. When you read the 10 amendments, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, there's nothing in there that binds you and I, nothing at all. Everything in there binds government from doing certain things. Why? Because as people, and as the first people laid out so carefully in the Mayflower Compact, we have rights. We have the right, we are right to do certain things. The word right means what it says. It is right if we engage in these activities. It is right if, according to the First Amendment, we have the freedom of speech. Congress shall make no law, right? That's a negative right. Congress shall make no law. We have the right to speak freely. We have the right to freedom of the press. We have the right to freedom of religion. Does that mean government doesn't belong in religion? No. It just means government isn't allowed to found a religion. The separation of church and state's an interesting thing. That came in a one lousy letter that Thomas Jefferson probably regret to this day in his grave that he wrote to the Danbury Baptist Society. God is part of the United States government. It has to be. The legal case that we build for the state of Jefferson comes from God. It is the inalienable rights endowed within you at the moment of your creation that really is the fundamental principle for the state of Jefferson and the United States of America. You have the right to do these things. You have the right to keep and bear arms. It is right that you keep and bear arms. It is right that no soldiers be quartered in your house. It is right that you have the right to be secure in your house, your paper, your persons, your things. It is right that government has no place in those things unless certain criteria are met. It is right that you be judged by a jury of your peers, not a jury of the peers. That's different. Those are the king's buddies. Those are the president's pals. Those are congressmen's pals. That's a federal judge that doesn't pay attention to what the people want. It is right that you be judged by a jury of your peers, your friends and your neighbors who know you and know your honor, your integrity, the way you live, or whether you're a crook or a lazy rapscallion. That is the right thing. It is right that you never be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment. It is right that you be afforded bail. It is right that you have certain promises made to you from your creation by God that you exercise as what William Blackstone calls a holy, free, and independent being. You were born and once again, whether you're a Christian or not, follow the legal case. You were born a free and independent being. If you follow the legal case that Christians all know in their hearts, you were created in the image of God. Well, what is God? He's the most free expression in the universe. Nobody tells God what to do. Nobody tells him what not to do. Nobody could stop him from doing those things even if they wanted to. That is God's right, and you were created in his image. Therefore, at the moment of your creation, you had rights that could not be separated from you. You can't sell them, you can't give them away. No one can take them from you, maybe, right? No one can take them from you unless you allow it. Those are your rights. So what does government have? Government is the creation of the people. The Mayflower Compact proves that. The Articles of Confederation prove that. The Declaration of Independence proves that. It proves that people created government. This is very important. We have to burn this into our hearts because we may have to fight over this at one point. It is very important that we understand that we were endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among those life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, here's the reason for government. This is the reason why people created government. And that to secure these rights, governments were instituted among men. Men weren't instituted among governments. Governments didn't create you for their play toys for all of the social engineering experiments they want to have or all the taxation schemes. You didn't come here afterwards in submission. You were here first. Government is your creation. Without you, government has no one to rule over. If the people didn't exist, why would you bother having a government? In fact, if not a lot of people existed, what would government be worth? Who would care? Thomas Paine said so in Common Sense. He said, when people gather in enough numbers, they must form a society. Why? Because one guy can't build a cabin. One guy might be able to chop down the tree, but he can't drag it back to the home site, and he can't lift it himself. He can't raise a roof alone. So when your gathering creates enough social force that you decide to band together in some kind of society, great things are possible. We can achieve much more together than we can as separate individuals. That's just the truth. And that's why we form societies. That's why we form social compacts that we call government or constitution. That's the only reason. What other reason would there be if you as individuals did not benefit from that compact? Who on earth but Karl Marx would advocate a compact where everybody's unhappy? But we're all equal. We're all equally miserable, we're all equally broke, and we're all equally subject to the government. Murder, imprisonment, whatever. But in our society, in constitutional republic, the only reason we form government is because we all do better. We wouldn't want it otherwise. So when we form this social compact, when we come together as a society, we do so for mutual benefit. I'm going to help Coop there when he can't figure out how to get his horse out of the bar. I'm going to help anybody that needs help. That's what my friends do with me every day. I don't need a paper that says that. But now, what Thomas Paine also said was, when we form this colony, and we're few in number, the first legislature will be under the branches of a big tree. Everybody in the colony meets, and we don't really have laws. We might have some regulatory disputes. Hey, Joe, quit letting your horse pound my corn down. And Joe says, well, I can't keep him in. And everybody says, well, let's go build Joe a fence, and then he can keep him in. But then as the colony grows, it is necessary, because of the distance traveled or the number of people involved, that we elect representatives. And here's where trouble hits. So we elect these representatives, but then Thomas Paine went on to say in Common Sense that as the population of the colonies grow, we must, by demand, elect more representatives so that each part and portion of the colony remains adequately represented. And so that the representative himself never draws apart from the people who elect him. It's very important that representatives be known to the vast majority of their constituents, because as Thomas Paine said, otherwise it's possible for them to create agendas which are separate from those who elect him. What has happened here? How are we doing on this? In other words, we've gone from a place where you should be able to see your representative in the grocery store. That's what happens in Siskiyou County. I can trap them in aisle 10 in Walmart, and they can't get away because we're small and they know me and we know them. But here in the state of California, I mean, come on, folks. One state senator for 1 million people. He doesn't care what you say. He doesn't care what you think. He doesn't care what you want. And moreover, he doesn't care what any of you think. In fact, if every single one of you voted for the other fella, he wouldn't even care about that because it wouldn't have any impact on him. What does he have to care about to get reelected? Got to care about the money, because it costs $1 million to run a campaign in California. We're not the ones giving him the money. Chevron is, SEIU is, CalPERS, CalSTRS, California Nurses Association, the big unions, Teamsters, Chevron, Shell, whoever else, Bank of America. That's where the money comes from. I'd love to do a FOIA, and we may yet do that, on each one of these legislators' calendars, because I'd love to know how many times he meets with people like us and how many times in a day he meets with people that have a checkbook, a big one. I would just be willing to wager that balance is fairly well skewed. So we've come to the place now where we have to make up our minds, because government has ignored God. How has government ignored God? Well, in many ways in California, there's a bill in the hopper right now that's going to make parts of the Bible illegal. I will fight over that. I will fight. I know how, and I can. And I will fight for that. You know, we talk about a line in the sand. A line in the sand is something that Colonel Travis said at the Alamo. And he didn't say, don't cross that line. That's not what a line in the sand means. He drew a line in the sand and he walked across it, and he said, how many of you men will join me? General Santa Anna, who was a pretty bad monkey, had a fairly large force of Mexican lancers, cavalry, infantry, tough men. These were not sissies. They were fighters and professionals at that. And he said, how many of you will cross this line and stand with me knowing that within 2 or 3 days you'll all be dead? But if we can hold them until Sam Houston gathers his forces, there is a chance that victory will be ours. Of course, he didn't mean his personally because he was going to be dead, and he knew it. And every man that crossed that line knew they were not going to walk out of there. They sent some of their wives out. A few people got out that way. But basically, every fighting man that stayed in that fort knew that within 48, 72 hours, they'd all be dead. And yet they chose to do that. They crossed that line in the sand because they found a cause, liberty, that was important enough to them to fight and die for. Abigail Adams, Mercy Otis Warren, John Adams, John Hancock. John Adams and John Hancock were in Pastor Jonas Clark's house the night before the battle at Lexington that shot her around the world. And Hancock was a little bit scared. He said to Pastor Clark, he said, are your men ready for this? We have it on good report that 700 British regulars are coming. 700 regulars. And guess what? That was his own government. This was not a revolution, folks. This was a civil war. John Hancock was a British subject. John Adams was a British subject. Pastor Clark was a British subject. Captain John Parker and his 70 men were British subjects. Their own government was coming to kill them and capture their stocks of powder. Why not the guns? Why weren't they coming to take the guns? Because contrary to the leftist narrative now, the guns were in every single man's home. They weren't held in common. Everybody had their own gun. You brought your own gun. You were required as a militiaman to provide a musket with at least a 60-inch barrel, a haversack with 3 days' ration, and 25 rounds of ammunition, powder and shot. The cannonballs and the big stuff was kept in the village, but the guns and ammo were each man's, himself. So they're coming to get these guys. Their own government is coming to kill them. You imagine that? What if we knew in the morning that 700 California National Guardsmen would be lined up across the road to fire on this building? How many of us would be standing in the parking lot opposing them? Amen, brother. Amen. Not enough hands, but amen. So Hancock asked Pastor Clark, can your guys handle this? I mean, they're coming to kill me and Mr. Adams here. And Clark said to him, he said, I've been training these men for this very moment all their lives. Because Christian pastors in those days defended the Word of God. These king's soldiers were not coming because of the money. They were coming because King George III ignored God's law and the liberty provided to the colonists because they were born free and endowed with rights from their Creator. And that's in the English Charter of Rights, it's in the Magna Carta, it's in the Grand Remonstrance, it's in 15 documents prior to the Declaration of Independence. Those concepts were not new. The colonists had those rights. They were given those rights by God. The king decided to violate those rights. It wasn't about the tea. The tea was cheaper if you bought it from England than if you bought it from someone else. They were just mad because the king was telling them what they could and could not buy. The Stamp Act was not because of the tax. The colonists were mad because they had the God-given right to use whatever kind of paper and literature they wanted to. And it was up to no king except King Jesus to tell them what to do with that stuff. That's where we've gone wrong. The government of California stands in opposition to the God that rules this country and rules our heart. Because we are only subject to Him. I am subject to no man. I am subject to God. Because God tells me that if I humble myself and I lift my eyes to Him and I ask for things that are righteous and just, in His name, they'll be given to us. And I'm not talking about a new TV. I never asked for a radio or a TV. You know what I'm talking about. The California government says that you are lazy, that your life is too easy, that you are really a bad person. I forget what Jerry Brown said, because you may have voted for Donald Trump. He doesn't even know you. He doesn't know who you voted for. He said that you need to be brainwashed. He told the Dutch Parliament he violated the Logan Act. He violated Article 1, Section 10, or excuse me, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 4, going to Europe to make a deal with the Europeans about climate change. No state has the power without the consent of Congress to make any agreement with any other state or any foreign power. He violated Article 3 of the California Constitution that says California is an inseparable part of the United States and the Constitution of the United States is the highest law of the land. He violated Article 20, which is his oath of office, where he swears to support and defend the United States Constitution and the Constitution of California, Article 3 and Article 20. He violates Article 1, Section 1, which says that you were born free and independent beings. In other words, you are creatures of God. That's the way the men in 1848 wrote that. You were born free and independent beings. Who is the ultimate expression of freedom? God. In whose image were you created? God's. You are free and independent because you are creatures created of God. And as such, you enjoy certain inalienable rights. Among those are possession, pursuit, and protection of property. Well, in California, you can't carry a gun unless you get a government permission slip if you live in a county that happens to be able to grant those. Now, California's law does have an exemption in it. If your life is in danger, you're allowed to produce a gun and protect your life. In a recent court case, Nichols versus Brown, Charles Nichols asked a 3-judge panel in federal court, he said, yes, but Your Honor, where is the magic gun going to come from? Because I'm not allowed to leave my house with it. And I can be jailed as a felon and then prohibited from ever owning a gun again if I do leave my house with it. I can't carry it concealed because my county won't give a concealed carry permit. And I don't want government permission anyway, and the Second Amendment says I don't need it. And California says I can't carry it openly. So where does the magic gun come from, Your Honor, if I need to protect my life? There is that exemption, though. You are allowed to protect your life if you can somehow get home and get the gun and get back to where it's being threatened in time. But if you do, it'd be a murder, because if you left the scene, now your life isn't in danger. But you see where I'm going with this. It is ignorance, and it is absolute intolerance, and it is absolutely despicable insult to the laws of nature and nature's God that create the government of California and their behavior toward us and all of the citizens of California each and every day. Now, citizens are afforded certain benefits. Senator Lara from Bell Gardens now wants people who broke the law to come here to have the right to join state boards and state agencies and run them. You know, look, how can you have the same concern for your fellow citizens if you are not one? How can you have respect for the rule of law if you don't respect the rule of law when you came here? You know what? I'm not against immigration. I'm truly not. But follow the rules. I have friends all over the world. I have a couple of friends in Egypt that have been trying to come here for 15 years. And you know, they're thrilled at the prospect that in 2 or 3 more, they're going to make it. And let me tell you, I know a guy, I have a friend who was a major in the Yugoslavian Air Force when they were communist. And he hated communism so much that one night he went home, he got his wife and his 2 children, he wrapped them in blankets, they left everything they owned and walked across the Carpathian Mountains into Italy to freedom. And 12 years later, he was granted temporary asylum in the United States, and 7 years after that, he got his citizenship. And you know what happened to Mitch? He got a job with World Airways, and he flew airplanes with me for a long time. You know what happened to him? He got fired one day because he was in a hotel somewhere, I think it was in Europe, and somebody said, "You stupid Americans, you're a bunch of lazy," and then he uttered a few cuss words, "and you think you're so good, you think your country is so great." Mitch went over the counter at that guy and beat his rear end right on the spot. That's how much, because you know what? He knows what tyranny is. He and his family. He watched his friends disappear in the middle of the night for no good reason, but they wouldn't follow the Communist Party line. That's what we're in danger of here. You know, it's nothing less than that. So now that we know these things, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? Here's what we have to start doing. It isn't enough to talk. It isn't enough to meet anymore. We're at a point in this process. We've been involved in this, what, Terry, 4.5 years now? 5 years, something like that? Yeah, 4. Okay. We've gotten declarations from 23 counties. We've appealed to the legislative branch in California's legislature in no uncertain terms that we are tyrannized, we want liberty, we demand liberty, we want that through an Article 4, Section 3 state split. And we're not going to take no for an answer. We demand that. We were totally ignored. So we tried with the executive branch. We tried to serve the governor with papers, and he not only made an appointment with us to accept these papers, not him personally, because he's not that kind of governor. He is more of a king, more of a monarch. You are subjects of the king. You're not citizens here. You are subject to the whim of California. You're not citizens here. You have no liberty here, so get that out of your head, because we've allowed that to slip away. Because the liberty unexercised is the liberty lost. But it's not the end, because we can regain that liberty if we want it bad enough. So we went to the executive branch, and he not only ignored the fact that he had made an appointment with us, he agreed to accept our paperwork. We weren't expecting him to do anything with it, because we're not stupid. But he did agree at a certain time and place that someone would come out and take that paperwork. And then we traveled, some of us hundreds and hundreds of miles. And we got to his office, and this poor CHP guy, I almost felt sorry for that guy. He came out, and he went back in, and he came out, and he went back in, and then he came out again, and he says, I'm sorry, they can't take your papers. And I said, really, why? And he says, well, because they're doing a lot of important stuff in there. Am I kidding? That's actually what he said. I mean, I felt sorry for this guy, and I said, they're doing important stuff? And he said, yeah, they have a lot of important stuff they have to do today, and they don't have time to see you. They don't have time for the people who created this government. They don't have time to spend 1 minute taking some information from the people who created the state of California and give them all their power. Because, why? Because why? How can we prove that? Government was instituted to secure liberty, right? Deriving all of its just power from the consent of the governed, right? And whenever government becomes destructive of those ends, here we get to the good part, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute government more favorable to those ends. Article 2, Section 1 of the California Constitution says that all just power is derived from the people. Not some of it, not part of it, not the part the government doesn't want. All just power is derived from the people, all of it. Government was instituted for their good, meaning the people. Government was not instituted to serve itself. Government does not serve itself. Government has one function, to serve the people. Government was instituted for the people's good in the state of California. Whenever government fails to serve the people, it is their right, Article 2, Section 1, California Constitution, it is their right to alter or reform it whenever the public good demands. Not, you know, it's funny, it didn't say on election day. It didn't say every calendar quarter. It didn't say when you file an initiative and then 6 months later the Secretary of State prints it out and then 3 months later you get permission to gather signatures but you only got 90 days and after that 90 days is up, if those signatures are valid based on whose opinion? The government's. That we may put that on the ballot and then at the next regular election you can vote on that and if that passes then government is altered. That's not what it says. It says people have the right to alter or reform government whenever the public good demands. And that is nothing less than what we propose. So we have appealed to the legislature. We have appealed to the executive. 0. We're going to the third branch of government right now. The last branch, by the way. After the judicial, we're out of branches. We've started this out to do the right thing. We have done the right thing. In fact, we have appealed to that government. Let me steal another line from the Declaration of Independence. In the most humble terms, we have supplicated ourselves. We have humbled ourselves before this government. We have asked them nicely in 25 different ways, please won't you listen to our grievance? And I believe it was William Penn who said, you know, in Parliament, when you have an act come out that seems tyrannical, you know, you really don't pay too much attention to it. But when, remember, there's nothing new under the sun, you suffer a long train of abuses, and they all lead to the same end, tyranny, then what are the people to do? So we are appealing to the court now. And here's the problem with the court. Article 4, Section 3, nor shall a state be formed from the territory of one state or two adjoining states unless the state legislature affected agrees and Congress agrees. We have to have the permission of the state legislature and Congress. Now, they're not going to give it to us, right? So the only avenue we had left was court. So we sued them for lack of representation and dilution of vote. And we have been beating at this for pretty close to $500,000 in a year so far. And we have a federal judge who would deny the people justice. And she has consistently denied the people their day in court. How has she done this? Oh, well, yeah, you may not have enough representation, but since everybody in California is equally screwed, there's nothing the court can do for you. I love that one, I really do. That would fly in Castro's Cuba. Or how about Xi Jinping in China? He just forced a provision through the Chinese legislature, making him president for life. No more term limits. Xi is going to be president of China until he drops dead or somebody puts one in the back of his head, one or the other. Now, let's say the Chinese people had a court where they could maybe find justice, and they sued Xi for lack of representation and dilution of vote. You know what the Chinese court would say to him? You know, you got a good case, but since all the people of China are equally screwed, there's nothing the court can do for you. It's called a general harm. That's how courts deny people justice, through the general harm principle. The other way they do it is, they say that the subject matter jurisdiction, in other words, well, you know, yeah, you don't have enough representation. And it was done to keep the Chinese from getting the vote in 1879. But, you know, really that's a political question, and courts don't solve political questions. So, dismissed. That's the other way courts do it. General harm and lack of subject matter jurisdiction, and the political question. So, it's interesting to me that court cases are heard all the time that have general harm. In other words, when a court wants to find jurisdiction and standing, it can. They do it all the time. But when they want to deny the body of the people justice, they simply say, well, you know, it's a political question, we can't help you. Well, if that's true, how did we get to this place? How did Reynolds versus Sims get to the Supreme Court if it was a political question, lack of representation and dilution of vote? How did Baker versus Carr get to the Supreme Court? How did Gray versus Sanders, Westbury versus Sanders, Citizens United? Every one of those was the same political question as ours. Do you know why the court does not want to settle this question? First of all, Judge Mueller's a lifelong Democrat, knows Darrell Steinberg, former pro tem of the California Senate, worked on the Sacramento City Council, was an Obama appointee. You know, there you go. She is going to vote with the monoparty. So, she has dismissed our complaint a couple of times. She cannot dismiss our case because she doesn't have the jurisdiction as a single judge to do it, and she knows that. McManus versus Shapiro and United States Code Title 28, Section 2284, tells her that she must appoint a three-judge court for any action regarding federal or state apportionment. Any action. The only time she's allowed to dismiss with prejudice is if the suit is either settled Supreme Court law or it's frivolous and without merit. Well, I've just got to tell you, even though this judge takes our complaint and shows it to the state before she makes any rulings for us, the state has never argued that our case is frivolous and without merit. They've never mentioned those words in a sentence. In fact, the state admits our causes of action are true. Yeah, you don't have enough representation, but the state gave her the information. You don't have enough representation, but since you're all screwed equally, there's nothing this court can do about it. And she used that. But now we have some friends. We managed to entertain a justice of notable repute. He was probably the only conservative on the Ninth Circuit Court. He was the Chief Justice, Alex Kaczynski, and he is consulting on our case now. And so what Judge Kaczynski and our legal team did, they wrote a demand for a 3-judge court and cited McManus v. Shapiro, Title 28, 2284. They cited all of those things, and essentially you're telling the judge, you don't have the power not to appoint the 3-judge court. You don't have that power. And the Supreme Court was very clear, and Congress is very clear. And Article 3 courts do not have jurisdiction that is extra constitutional. Article 3 courts only have jurisdiction over all matters of equity and law pursuant to the Constitution. They have no power to change the document, they have no power to ignore Congress, and they have no power to change the document which created them. So no matter what this judge tries to do, if she does not appoint a 3-judge court, she is corrupt. June 1st is very important. Public pressure counts. I'm standing here like Colonel Travis, who will cross that line in the sand. I know you have to take days off. Thanks, buddy. I know you'll have to take days off. I know it's a long way. I know it's a pain. I know it may result in nothing. We've been to too many of these for me to tell you it won't. But if we want this, it is ours to win or lose. Ours. Not hers, not theirs. If we want this, we'll show up. If we don't want it, don't show up. And you won't get it. Because it is nothing more than the will of the people expressed through their presence in that courtroom and outside. And yeah, some people have to stand outside. Some people have to stand on the stairs because this judge is so arrogant, she won't even give us the big courtroom. Because she just knows you're not going to show up next time. She hopes you won't. In fact, they all hope it'll be so inconvenient and so uncomfortable for you to stand outside that courtroom that you just won't bother to go. And you'll do what every other group in California has ever done. Just let it die. And then start packing your junk and see if you can find a spot in Idaho that isn't taken already. And I say no to that. Because you know what? If you won't fight here, where will you fight? And if you won't fight now, when will you fight? And I say if you won't fight now, you won't fight ever. So June the 1st is important. June the 15th, we have to go back again. Yes, it's only 2 weeks later. We got to go back because that's the motions hearing. Now, if we get the 3-judge court, Title 28, 2284 also tells us that the result of any action that issues from a 3-judge court, primary jurisdiction for the appeal is the United States Supreme Court. Yay, Donald Trump and Neil Gorsuch. So if we get the 3-judge court on June 1st, the state's motion to dismiss on all the same garbage reasons that Waters has had the last 2 times he's come up with it, will be heard by a 3-judge court. No matter what that ruling is, cheer, because we're going to the Supreme Court. If this judge does not give us the 3-judge court, then we must show up on the 15th because we have to make sure that she doesn't dismiss this complaint again. Remember, she can't dismiss the case. She knows that. She says it in print. But what she hopes to do is outspend us. Oh, I'll just keep dismissing that complaint until they run out of money. Is that justice, really? I mean, that's taxation to me. And that's the power to destroy justice. And we can't tolerate that. And we have another issue coming up. We have Tim Draper and his state deal again. And Tim is a funny guy. He's a billionaire. He doesn't think too much. He doesn't do enough research. Well, he walks in the room. You know, look, he's typical big picture guy. He walks in a room full of lawyers and he goes like this, make it so, and then he leaves the room. And of course, they're getting big money from him, probably $700-800 an hour each. And so they go, okay, fellas, yeah, no, this isn't constitutional, but if we tell him that, we're not going to get new Ferraris this year. The Lambo will have to be put on layaway. So they tell him, sure, Mr. Draper, we'll get her done for you. That's what a good lawyer would probably try to do. So anyway, what he did was he developed a 3-state initiative, and he laid out the state boundaries to suit who? Oh, I know, Tim Draper. One of them is the coastal elites with Silicon Valley and all the money and all the rich property owners and so on, and he can run that state from his castle in Silicon Valley. The other state is Los Angeles, subjugating all of its neighboring counties up through Central California. And the third state is San Francisco County and Sacramento County, subjugating us. So our official position is that we don't want that thing to pass. However, let's talk some turkey here. Let's talk some reality here. The state of Jefferson is about 3% of the state of California's people. Our registered voters probably constitute about 1% of the registered voters in the state of California. And because of our efforts, state split is not fringe anymore. State split is mainstream. A lot of people are talking about it. They are talking about it in Washington State, they're talking about it in Illinois, they're talking about it in Michigan and New York and a lot of places. And they're talking about it a lot in California now. And the Democratic Party probably has it in their head that if this thing passes, they get lots of stuff in Washington, D.C., and lots of new senators and lots of new congressmen, and with Sacramento and San Francisco securely in charge of the North State, they even get this. And they keep stealing water and keep stealing wood and keep stealing your money and your taxes and your children's futures and all that stuff. They got a little problem, though. Us. If somehow this thing passes, it will create an avenue where if we are prepared to cross a line in the sand, we can make something good happen out of this piece of trash that Draper calls a state split. I'm not telling you how to vote. We know what our official position is. We do not want Draper's thing to pass, and your vote is your private affair anyway. What I am saying is, if somehow, if this piece of trash passes, and we are prepared to put 20 or 30,000 people around that Capitol building with broomsticks, rakes, and pitchforks. I didn't say it. And we're prepared to show up with those kind of numbers, it is possible we can affect the boundary and take our state. I mean, take it. They're not going to give it to us. It's not going to be easy, and we need 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people. In other words, we need to show them that we're not going home without liberty. We won't take no for an answer. That's another eventuality. And so each and every county has to be prepared for 2,000 people, men, women, children, doesn't matter. You know, nothing crazy, nothing stupid. All we have to do is show up. I am going to bring my pitchfork, though, just, you know, for visual impact. So if we're prepared to do that in November, if the Draper deal passes, it is possible out of that chaos, we can re-engineer that border and take Jefferson from the king. Take it. They're not going to give it to us. I want everybody to think very seriously about that. And when you're doing that, I'd like you to pay passing thought to Mercy Otis Warren and Abigail Adams and John Clark, Jonas Clark and John Parker and all of Peter Muhlenberg, who finished his sermon at the front of his church. He peels off his robe and he's standing there in a Continental Major's uniform, and he said, there's a time for war and a time for peace, and the time for peace is over. Who will join me? And he and 300 of his congregations went to war, and he ended up a major general. I'm talking about guys like that. This is our chance. This is our moment. We won't get another one. If we win this court case, let's talk about that. If we win this court case, it is not constitutional to split a state in court. It isn't. It's no more constitutional than it is for Draper to split a state by initiative. Why? Because Congress has to approve. You can tell the state to split all you want, but Congress has to approve. And if they don't, you just wasted all your money and all your time. You can't split a state in court, but here's what we can do. We can create a situation where we expand representation in the state of California so dramatically that it will yank the rug out from under the king and queen of Sacramento. And by king and queen, I mean Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom. Now, what happens if we succeed in that? We don't know, because the settlement will not be done at the Supreme Court. What Supreme Courts do is they rule on matters of equity and law, and then what they'll do is remand to the federal court for settlement. Now, what is our lever? What if California, what if we get back to the, what if we win and we get back to the federal court and California just drags its feet and refuses to negotiate, thinking that because most of us are gray-haired, we'll all be dead and then they won't care? Well, there we have 2 U.S.C. 6, which is a portion of the 14th Amendment that's only been utilized after the Civil War, but it is legal, ethical, and moral. And that is where when a state denies the proper vote to any person or group of people, in other words, voter abridgment, it is within the power of Congress to deny them sitting seats in Congress until they remedy the situation. Now, based on the ratios that our attorneys have constructed, we figure we could deny California about 25 seats in Congress. Now, each congressman brings home $5 billion a year to his district. That's a ton of money. California would be immediately broke. They would be immediately bankrupt without $100 billion in federal aid. So that's our lever. Now, what are we going to try to get? If we ask for too little, we won't get enough to get our own state. If we ask for too much, we just won't get it because it'll be ridiculous. What I would like to see is, I would like to see this state go to the ratio that the founders of this state not only envisioned, but implemented and stayed in place for over a decade. And that's 1 assemblyman for every 2,500 people and 1 senator for every 6,000. Because that's what Thomas Paine meant. That's what the Constitution is for. It's so that your representative has to look you in the eye and he has to care about what you think. And he has to care about your vote. It's simple mathematics. If the people in this room could elect a senator all by themselves, would he come here once in a while and see what you thought? You betcha he would. If the people in the sides of a room twice this big, same thing. Even 1,000 people per representative, he'd have to care what you thought because you could get rid of him and it would be cheap and easy, just like in Vermont and New Hampshire, where a campaign costs $1,000, the guy goes out and knocks on 3,000 doors. If he can get 1,501 people to vote for him, he's in. It's cheap and it's easy. But if you have a senator that represents 1 million people, you couldn't get rid of that guy if you wanted to in the worst way possible. So we need representation on a scale where it is cheap and easy to get rid of a bum, and then you know what we do? We start getting rid of them. And we put our own people in there. And we either vote ourselves out or we raise so much hell that they'll ask us to leave. One or the other, I don't care which. But the only way we can guarantee liberty is start over. We need a reboot. California is broken. It can't be fixed. Its constitution is the joke of the legal world. It is, according to E. Dodson Wilson, it is everything a constitution ought not to be. This has 7,200 plus minus words in it. Been running the nation for 230 something plus years. California Constitution is around 80,000 to 100,000 words on any given day, and it's been amended 525 times in the last 160 years. It has stuff in it you wouldn't believe. Sometime when you have a couple of days, read that thing. It's horrible. And it does not protect you from government. It protects government from you. Article 1 is the only place in the Constitution where you're protected from government. All the rest of the 22 articles protect government from you. That's not okay with me. You know, Patrick Henry was a pretty outspoken guy. And he gave a speech to the Virginia Burgesses one time, and in that speech, he said some fairly outlandish things because these guys were scared. They were really scared. And you know, he said that it's natural for man to indulge in the illusion of hope. That's normal. We all want to be hopeful. He said, we're apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth and listen to the siren song of hope no matter what the real circumstances are. But then he went on to say, should we act now? And the other guys were yelling, no, we're weak, we can't, we're weak, we're just a bunch of old people in this room. There are a few young people, thank you, Lord, thank you, Jesus, for young people. But by and large, we're a bunch of old people and we're weak. And he said, well, we're weak, yeah, but when are we going to be stronger? Next month, next year, next week? When will we be stronger than we are now? And he also said that he wants to know the truth in all of its horror. In other words, you can tell yourself the lie that someday this will be okay. But I'd rather know the truth and be able to plan for it. And that's what Patrick said. And he said, you know, if you listen, you listen to the South, you can hear the war's already started. You need to be brainwashed for climate change. You're lazy and ungrateful because you're mad about the gas tax. You're going to save the world so that the Chinese can keep polluting. You're lazy deplorables. You are everything that the state of California hates. And in fact, recently when we first started this, Governor Brown said, well, why don't they just leave? I'm not their governor anyway, because I only represent progressive ideas and progressive values. I don't represent the people of California. So Patrick went on to say that he said, really, what do you want? He said, what would gentlemen have? He was asking the people in the room, what do you want? And they said, peace. We want peace and we want security. We want safety. Well, Ben Franklin stopped that argument. He said that those who would trade their liberty for temporary safety will achieve and deserve neither. And the men in the room said, well, we want peace. They wanted to write another letter, yet another letter. Why can't we just beg Governor Brown, please let us be for a little while so we can regroup? And he said, peace? You might cry peace, but there is no peace. The war has already started, and if you listen to the South, you can hear the clash of arms from here. He said, is life so sweet or peace so dear so as to be purchased at the price of slavery and chains? Almighty God forbid it. Why God? The giver of rights, the giver of liberties, the giver of law. God's law above man's law. No law supersedes God's law. Almighty God forbid it, for I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Thank you.